Tobias Harris re-signing with the Philadelphia 76ers. He is signing for $180 million over 5 years.
It's not many times that a professional athlete makes me want to jump off a bridge, but Tobias Harris makes me want to do exactly that.
Tobias Harris declining the way that he's declined is because Tobias Harris got paid and stopped trying.
Casual Sixers fans, they'll trade me for a crumble cookie.
We're going to trade Tobias Harris for a crumble cookie.
Tobias Harris over me?
The best part of tonight ending is that we never have to see Tobias Harris again.
Tobias Harris didn't score. Philadelphia. Ooh, oh, donut.
Tobias took up such a huge portion of the salary cap that it crippled the team permanently.
Every year, the Philadelphia 76ers have had to painfully sit back and watch as their fierce rivals bask in the glory of victory. Despite having a generational talent in Joel Embiid to go along with varying stars coming in and out of the city, this team just keeps losing. There are dozens of theories trying to answer the question of why they've struggled, the common ones ranging from taking a dump on Embiid, to poor coaching, to Ben Simmons, to bad luck. While all of these points have some validity, there's been one paramount problem that's hampered the franchise more than any other, one that nobody has talked about. From the years of 2019 to 2024, 6 seasons, all of the Sixers' flexibility was weighed down by a giant anchor the size of 1,000 suns. The source of most, if not all of their pain and suffering during this time can be linked to one catastrophic decision they made in the summer of 2019. That being when they officially signed Tobias Harris to a max contract. A mistake so grave that it placed the franchise in an inescapable chokehold, crippling their ability to surround Joel Embiid, their superstar MVP center, with the necessary talent to succeed. Those who made this decision were never held accountable for their actions, while the money man himself just got rewarded for his 5 years of mediocrity with yet another fat check. The NBA's biggest thief has successfully completed another robbery. Tobias is now the highest paid player ever who never made an All-Star appearance. He got paid top dollar to hinder one contending team, and now he gets to be the tank commander for another. A common misconception surrounding Tobias Harris is that yes, he was overpaid in his time in Philly, but he was still a valuable piece for the team. That couldn't be further from the truth. In his 5 years with the Sixers, Harris served as a barrier to their success, not an asset. He joined Philly in the 2018-19 season after being moved from the Clippers during the trade deadline. To the credit of Tobias, he masterfully calculated his value before the season began. When faced with the choice of re-signing with the LA Clippers, Harris and his team turned down a 5-year, $80 million deal on the table in exchange for the chance to receive a max in the summer of 2019. His risk paid off beautifully, as the first half of the 2018-19 season for Tobias was his best season as a pro. He shot 50% from the field and 43% from 3 on 5 attempts per game, which remains a career-high shooting percentage to this day. At the time, he was considered to be one of the most underrated players in the league, playing so well that some felt he was worthy of a first All-Star appearance. He didn't get it, but most believed it was only a matter of time before the rising 26-year-old started chalking up countless prestigious accolades. Contract year Tobias was a demon unlike any other, but the Clippers opted to trade him and chase bigger stars instead of taking the route of paying him and remaining mediocre. So they shipped him to Philly, which wasn't necessarily a bad deal for the Sixers on the surface, who gave up a few firsts and Landry Shamet. The problem with Philly was that on the day they formally acquired Tobias Harris, it was already guaranteed they'd give him a max contract before he even stepped foot on the court. The early warning signs of this guy being nothing but trouble came during the 2019 playoffs. Against the eventual champion Toronto Raptors in round 2, Tobias put on a disappearing act akin to Houdini. He didn't have a single good game, averaging just 14 points on 38% field goal shooting and 28% from 3. He shot 6 of 17 in both games 1 and 6, and 3 of 11 in game 2. But the worst of the worst came in a pivotal game 4. The Sixers had a big opportunity to take a commanding 3-1 lead at home, and lost by just 5 in a game that easily could have gone in their favor. The deciding factor for this L was indeed Harris, who shot 7 of 23 from the floor, and a dreadful 2 of 13 from downtown. Down the stretch, he was comically bad, missing 5 threes in the last 8.5 minutes, single-handedly costing his team the game. Had he just sunk one or two of these triples, it would have changed everything. The red flags were everywhere, but the Sixers, who were fighting for the title of the dumbest franchise in the NBA, were somehow infatuated with Harris anyway. So on the first day of free agency 2019, the Sixers and Toby came to an extension agreement. 5 years, $180 million. $10 million less than the max he could receive. How generous of him to take a pay cut. Tobias getting this deal was simply a product of perfect timing. His peak as a player came during his contract year, and the team he signed with was all but forced to give him what he wanted because they had backed themselves into a corner. You see, the Sixers had made 2 blockbuster trades in the 2018-19 season. The first move, getting Jimmy Butler, had ended in a divorce because his max contract needs were not met. Now with Butler gone, pressure was firmly placed on the shoulders of the Sixers front office to avoid the possible catastrophe of losing both their big acquisitions. They had to acquiesce to Harris's demands, paying him exactly the top dollar that he wanted. So if you're keeping score, the Sixers committed the cardinal sin of paying a max to Tobias instead of Jimmy. Why? Well, it was viewed as the safer move. Tobias was 26, so the Sixers felt he just had to get better, while old head unk status 30-year-old Butler was seen as nearing wash territory. Plus, Toby appeared to fit far more seamlessly than Butler as a third star with Embiid and Simmons. He'd stand in the corner like a good little boy and play into the flow of the offense, unlike ball hog Jimmy. The cherry on top was that Harris was an easygoing, unproblematic guy. Comparatively, Jimmy was the fellow with a reputation as clubhouse cancer. All of these reasons for handing Harris a max over Butler have aged about as well as polio, which is why I consider it to be the worst contract ever awarded in NBA history given the context. It was such a disastrous lapse in judgment that it can quite literally be bullet pointed as the sole reason why the Sixers never won with Joel Embiid. The future MVP was 24 when Tobias joined his team, and 30 when he left. This deal tied Philly's arms behind their back for half a decade. And not only that, but Harris proved time and time again to be chronically unreliable in key moments when Philly needed him. The roster's highest paid player was the antithesis of winning basketball, and it wouldn't take long for the Sixers to realize they had made a huge mistake. In fact, I can point to the exact time where the city of Philadelphia came to understand that Harris was a sunken cost. December 2019. Early on in the 2019-20 season, the Sixers and Heat had quickly developed one of the NBA's biggest rivalries seemingly out of nowhere. Philly blew them out once on November 23rd. Then on December 18th, the Heat narrowly beat them at Wells Fargo Center, handing the Sixers their first home loss of the season. This set up high stakes for the third rematch on December 28th in Miami. In this game, the Sixers, who had struggled mightily on the road, were on the brink of victory, having possession and leading by 2 with 25 seconds left. All they had to do was hold the ball, make free throws, and ride the tidal wave to a massive win. What instead unfolded was a disaster of epic proportions.
Harris breaks away, missed the dunk. Rebound, Simmons bats it out to Embiid. The Heat are going to have to foul. Oh, Butler knocked it away. Here's Hero with 8 seconds left for 3. Yes! Oh my!
Instead of maybe, I don't know, dribbling the ball out, Tobias thought he was MJ, going for the hammer. Well, if you're gonna do that, you should probably make it. But instead, he blew the dunk, leading to a sequence so comical it looked scripted to give Sixers fans depression. Still, the man had a chance to redeem himself in overtime. With 2.3 seconds left, the Sixers drew up a play that perfectly set up Tobias in the corner for a game-winning 3.
The look to Harris for the lead.
But his attempt clanked off the rim, handing the rival Heat a monumental win. In a season for the Sixers that could only be described as face planting onto wet concrete in slow motion, this game was the precise moment where it became fully apparent that they were in big trouble with Tobias. The 2020 playoffs in the bubble were where all hell broke loose. By the time the postseason rolled around, the Sixers were a shell of themselves. They had a failure of a regular season under their belt, and were now lacking star Ben Simmons due to injury. To try and beat the mighty Boston Celtics in round 1, they needed all hands on deck, which required Tobias to carry a heavy load on offense. He played horribly. In a 4-game sweep, he averaged roughly 16 points per game on 38% shooting from the field and 13% from 3. He made just 2 threes the entire series, both coming in Game 4. He shot 0 of 10 in Games 1 through 3. The superstar Embiid was left for dead, as the money man Philly paid to be his Robin was the equivalent of Barnacle Boy from SpongeBob. Within a year of signing him to the largest contract in franchise history, the Sixers now desperately wanted to get rid of Tobias Harris, but they couldn't. No matter the picks or young players they attached to him in trades, no one would bite. The Sixers had another bad contract on the team, Al Horford, who they easily traded to OKC in the offseason. Harris remained though, because unlike Horford, there was nothing redeemable about his game that made him attractive to a winning team. His playstyle of contested mid-range shots, back-down post moves, and hesitance to shoot wide-open threes was only good on teams that wanted to try and get the #1 pick in the draft. The perfect tank commander, maybe. A top 3 or 4 player on a contender? No. This, along with that price tag, made it impossible for the Sixers to trade him, despite general manager Daryl Morey's best efforts for 4 years to do so. Fun fact. Morey refused to take on Tyrese Halliburton from the Sacramento Kings back in a proposed 2022 trade for Ben Simmons, all because the Kings declined to take on Tobias in the deal as well. In the grand scheme of things, the 2020-21 season for Tobias Harris stands out as one where throughout it, Philly fans actually didn't want him expelled from the city for a change. If there's one year that can be picked as his quote-unquote best with the Sixers, it's this one, where Harris averaged 19 points per game, 7 boards, and shot 51% from the floor and 39% from 3 on about 3 attempts per game. The return of Doc Rivers, his former coach in his productive Clippers days of the past, helped ignite a spark that lifted Tobias from average to above average. He played so impressively that at one point, the Sixers even tried manufacturing a fake campaign advocating for him to be an all-star, which unsurprisingly failed. But hey, if Tobias could somehow evolve into a steady third option for the team, the Sixers' chances of winning a championship increased tenfold. That's why the 2021 playoffs served as the crossroads for the remainder of Harris's career. Either he could perform well, help the Sixers win a ring, and establish himself as a winning talent and fringe all-star, or he could disappoint and let his team down, cementing himself as nothing more than an overpaid disappointment. I'll give you 1 second to guess. He sucked. Did you look at the title of the video? His stats in these playoffs were fine, but with Tobias, you need to understand that his game is not something you judge by the sheet, but with your eyes. He wasn't a difference maker whatsoever. In the games the Sixers won, he played well, but when they lost, he played poorly. Never did he take it upon himself to rise and lead his team to wins like the highest paid player should. This inability was most highlighted in the Atlanta Hawks series in round 2, where any optimism Tobias had built in the regular season got destroyed. Every retelling of this series follows the same story, and I'm tired of it. The same old tale is that the heavily favored #1 seeded Sixers embarrassingly lost to the underdog Hawks at 7 because Ben Simmons imploded. And while this is half true, what is always criminally neglected in these retellings is the role Tobias Harris played in this loss with his lackluster performance. In particular, he disappeared in the second half of every single loss. In the crucial Game 4 and 5 Sixers losses, Harris scored just 6 and 0 second half points. Game 5 was especially disturbing. The Sixers watched in horror as their 25-point lead was viciously erased by the Hawks, all while Captain Moneybag sat in the corner and scratched his head, finishing with 4 points on 2 of 11 shooting for the game. In Game 7, Harris finished with 24 points, which sounds nice until you realize he shot 33% from the field and 28% from 3. His missed shots were embarrassing. The guy blew countless layup after layup, all of which would have served as huge momentum shots in a tight game. The Sixers lost, ending their season in humiliating fashion. While the two stars Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid took all the heat, the NBA's biggest thief stood undetected in the shadows, counting up the $34,358,850 he had just cashed out from his successful robbery. The most unfair aspect of Tobias' entire Philly tenure was how, despite playing uninspired basketball year after year, the Sixers' highest paid player was their least criticized. The basketball media rarely called him out, either because they didn't care or because they didn't know how bad it truly was. Before the 2021 playoffs, Tobias Harris had 2 different paths to choose from for how his career would finish. His pitiful showing against the Hawks had signaled he had chosen the path of underachievement. As a result, Sixers fans permanently abandoned him. Their once strong belief in him turned into undeterrable cynicism, and it would remain that way for the rest of his tenure. A harsh divide would soon form between Harris and the Philly faithful, one that Tobias would quickly find to be quite irritating. With Ben Simmons holding out because his feelings got hurt, the Sixers opened up the 2021-22 season struggling. Thus, much of the anger fans had was directed onto Tobias, who had declined from the past year and was back to being just an average player. In a January 3rd game against the 10-27 Houston Rockets, the money man finally swung back against booing Sixers fans. Tobias, who was in the midst of a stellar 14-point outing on 15 shots, hit a midi and then angrily scoffed at fans' applause, uttering the words, "Don't effing clap, don't effing clap," essentially saying that if he disliked him, stay on that side. It's worth noting that earlier in this game, after a brick layup, Harris responded to booing fans by raising his arms up and encouraging them. Unfortunately, this contempt from fans would only grow with time, while Harris's play remained disappointing. The 2022 playoffs were yet another example of how he failed to step up when his team needed him to. In round 2 against the Miami Heat, the assumption was that Harris would help carry the load after Embiid's face was knocked out by Pascal Siakam's elbow. He did manage 2 strong outings in games 1 and 2 with 27 and 21 points, but completely faded in games 3 through 6. 9 points, 13 points, 12 points, and 14. A poor showing. And the worst part is that unlike other players, when Harris isn't scoring, he's completely useless. No off-ball activity, no playmaking, no rebounding, hustling, or taking charges. His defense, at best, was at times above average. He did often guard the opposing team's best wing, in this case Jimmy Butler, but that's just more of a testament to how poor the Sixers' wing depth was, not because Harris was some defensive savant or anything. Philly had lost in round 2 again, and unlike last time, Harris got called out for his middling play, but not by the media or those crazy Sixers fans. It was by Jimmy Butler, the guy who the Sixers had ditched to hand Harris the dough. He had taken this whole experience personally, and he had words for the thief.
Tobias Harris over me?
3 years had gone by in the worst contract in NBA history, and each year had felt the same. There was no visible improvement in any part of Harris's game, and his stats had not only remained the same, but were starting to decline. The very bold claim I made earlier that Tobias Harris is the antithesis of a winning basketball player doesn't stem from these two negatives though. The real reason he should never sniff a contending roster for the remainder of his career is because he does not hustle. In all 5 years as a member of the Sixers, 435 games, playoff and regular season, Tobias drew 0 charges, not a single one. He never dove for loose balls, and hardly fought for offensive rebounds. He consistently gave bare minimum effort on the court, and actively sought out to avoid contact at all times. The player who got paid $4 million more than Joel Embiid in his MVP season couldn't even be bothered to give the slightest ounce of energy to try and help his team win basketball games. No drive to improve, no thirst to win, just insatiable greed to keep cashing in those fat checks. The last 2 years of Tobias Harris's reign of terror in Philadelphia were especially painful because of how clear it was that he needed to go. Superstar Joel Embiid had gone from an all-star in Harris's first year to megastar by his fourth, but Philly still couldn't win. This was in large part because the Sixers' wing depth was frail. In the 2022-23 season, Tobias and PJ Tucker were their starting wings. In 2023-24, it was Tobias and the 35-year-old Nico Batum. That's not going to have you taken seriously as a contender. On top of this, Philly's bench was spectacularly mid. The source for these problems? All of the Sixers' flexibility was wrapped up in the monstrous contract given to Tobias the Terrible. The front office couldn't afford to sign and trade for anyone. Just hope and pray that their stars bailed out their poor supporting cast. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. In the 2023 playoffs, Round 2 versus the Boston Celtics was a golden opportunity for the Sixers to earn the victory of a lifetime. In the huge Game 6 at home, Philly was up 3-2, but failed to finish the job in a close loss where Tobias scored just 2 points on 1 of 7 shooting in 42 minutes of play. The Sixers' momentum had been shattered, and they later dropped Game 7 to lose the series. So many of the Sixers' key playoff losses over the years can all be traced back to an inability from this fella to step up. Game 4 against the Raptors in 2019, Game 7 against the Hawks in 2021, and now Game 6 against the Celtics in 2023. A few weeks after the Sixers' elimination, a confident Tobias proclaimed to the media that casual Sixers fans would trade him for a crumble cookie.
Casual Sixers fans, they'll trade me for a crumble cookie.
Sixers fans responded by saying that crumble cookies were overpriced in mid, just like Tobias. Rather than exiting his ruinous Sixers tenure in peace, Harris had arguably his worst year as a member of the team in his final go-round with them. His play at many times during the 2023-24 season was actually below average, and it had quite the negative impact on the team. Embiid missed 43 games this year, and the Sixers crumbled without him, going 16-27. In the months of February and March while the big fella was out, Harris, who was presented with the perfect chance to prove his value, failed miserably to step up for his squad. As the Sixers piled up losses and tumbled down the standings, his stats remained the exact same they had been all year long, proving definitively that Harris is completely incapable of raising his play when his team needs him to. By this point, you had a higher chance of finding a Sixers fan with Stockholm Syndrome for Ben Simmons than finding one who actually enjoyed employing Tobias Harris. Nobody liked him, and Harris made sure to cement his legacy of failure in his final series with the team in the playoffs. Against the New York Knicks in round 1, Harris was horrible, averaging just 9 points per game. It was his lowest scoring average out of any of the 10 playoff series he laced up as a Sixer. He was mentally checked out. As a last thank you to the franchise that handed him the worst contract in NBA history, Harris scored 0 points in Game 6, his final game as a Sixer. It was a fitting ending to an era filled with nothing but laziness and disappointment. Now his contract had expired. Luckily for Tobias though, he was able to fool yet another team into giving him more money. This time, he tricked the Detroit Pistons, signing with them on a 2-year, $52 million deal once 2024 free agency began. One of the worst teams in the league, a fitting destination for Harris. It's obvious that he belongs nowhere near a contender. His one positive of being a decent locker room guy is heavily outweighed by his cons that include unreliability, poor shot selection, and a shocking lack of hustle. These are the last basketball traits the Pistons should want their young players to inherit. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking Tobias Harris contributes to winning in any way. Don't let anyone falsely tell you he was the third best player on the Sixers all these years either. No. The Sixers totem pole this past 23-24 season was Embiid, Maxey, and then someone like Kelly Oubre or Nico Batum, not Tobias Harris. His impact was hardly felt. In a world where little kids aspire to be like Mike or LeBron, I aspire to be like Tobias Harris. Get paid like a superstar, with none of the pressure or criticism that comes with it. $300 million earned in his 13-year career. No All-Star appearances. While some make the Hall of Fame for their stellar play, Tobias Harris will be remembered as a Hall of Fame bag chaser, or in my words, as the NBA's biggest thief.